views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a big show today. Congresswoman Grace Meng will be on to discuss technology in the schools throughout our city and how important it is to make it more available for those who really need laptops and Wi-Fi. We also are going to be discussing sexual harassment. Certainly, our city is unfortunately ripe with it, and an attorney will be on there to make sure that you understand your rights if unfortunately you've been a victim of sexual harassment while at work. And lastly, we're going to be discussing the eviction moratorium. The guidelines are different with respect to New York and federal, so you are certainly going to want to hear what this attorney has to say. Stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Thanks for being here. We have with us today Rick Ostrove. We're going to talk a little bit about sexual harassment in the workplace. Rick, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, David.
All right, well, it's certainly a topic that's all over the news, a la Governor Cuomo and everywhere else. Let's just start off with your basic definition of sexual harassment in the workplace.
Well, the thing is, there's a layperson definition of sexual harassment and there's a legal definition of sexual harassment. And the legal definition depends on what jurisdiction you're in. For us here in New York, you have a federal law, which is Title VII. You have the New York State Human Rights Law and you have the New York City Human Rights. They all have minor differences that are probably too technical to bother with today, but in general, there's two types of sexual harassment. There's hostile work environment harassment, and there's quid pro quo harassment. Quid pro quo harassment is more of, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. So, take care of me and I'll give you a promotion, or I'll give you a better job responsibility, or give you other opportunities or overtime if you have some type of a sexual relationship with me, or the opposite. If you don't, succumb to my flirtations or advances, then bad things are going to happen to you on the job. So that's one type. With Governor Cuomo, which is obviously what's hot in the news now, it's more of a hostile work environment, where typically, and under federal law, you'd have to show severe or pervasive harassment. But now under state and city law, you don't even have to show severe or pervasive harassment. You just basically have to show that the harassment was of such a nature that it made it harder for a certain woman to work in the workplace.
Now, in the workplace itself, there's always those who can blow the whistle and let the higher ups know that this is happening, and then there's maybe the fear of retaliation. Do you find that in terms of your practice that there are those who are afraid to rat other people out for their bad behavior? What are your thoughts on that?
There's no question that that's a real problem. In fact, that's the biggest problem that we have in uncovering sexual harassment. People are scared to come forward, and they've heard stories or seen situations where someone was retaliated against for something that they had done or that they said. They don't want to be labeled a rat. They don't want to have problems at the job. And again, just relating it to what's currently in the news with Governor Cuomo, imagine you're a 25-year-old girl and you all your life dreamed of getting into politics, and here you are working for the New York State governor. It's the job of a lifetime, and the last thing you want to do is upset the governor or have a problem in the workplace that's going to set you back because you got here. There's not a lot of people that get a job like that, and you don't want to rock the boat.
Is there a specific cause of damages for an employer who retaliates or someone who retaliates against someone else who makes that type of sexual harassment claim?
Yes, if you make a complaint on the job of sexual harassment, and whether or not you make that complaint through the formal process that's provided by the employer or through an informal process, such as just saying it to your boss or even saying it to a friend and then your friend reports it, if you're retaliated against for that, that is unlawful. People get confused about retaliation because you think that you should be able to complain about anything and not be retaliated against. But unfortunately, our laws aren't as strong as they should be, in my opinion. And oftentimes people engage in whistleblowing activity that should be protected, but isn't protected. But yes, if a woman comes forward, or it doesn't even have to be a woman, let's not forget, men can be sexually harassed too. And in fact, they are in many instances. But if you make a complaint of discrimination or sexual harassment or racial harassment, and you're retaliated against, that you have a claim. And in fact, I've seen many instances where an employee or a plaintiff has lost the underlying discrimination complaint, but they were able to win a trial on the retaliation component, because jurors understand retaliation sometimes more than they understand discrimination.
You know, the viewers, a lot of times they kind of want to take it from the grassroots level. So I'm a viewer, you know, something's not right in my office. People are making comments they shouldn't. They're touching me when they shouldn't. I come to you. What's the first thing you do?
You're saying if you come to me as a plaintiff's attorney?
Yeah, I come to you. I come to you as somebody who's been harassed. I come to you as someone who's been humiliated, and I want to bring an action. I come to you. What happens?
Well, you know, it's every situation is different, and whether or not that person should jump to an action or should make an internal complaint is the individual's choice. That's first of all. And it's not the right choice in all circumstances, because the law does try to give the employer the opportunity to correct the situation. And in fact, under both laws, you really do have to complain about it. I apologize. You do have to complain about it and give the employer a chance to resolve the situation. So if you don't do that, sometimes that could be fatal to a claim. So a lot of times when people come to me, I help them decide who to complain to, how to complain, should the complaint be in writing, should they record themselves making the complaint? Because a lot of times later when you bring a retaliation complaint, the employer says they never complained to me. And so, you know, it's a tough choice of exactly how to handle it, and it's a case-by-case basis. But
is there some kind of, you know, checklist that they should make before they get to you? You know, record a conversation, have everything in writing. Is there something that you'd like when they show up? At least they kind of may have some things in advance, or not really?
Yeah, well, I love it if they make a complaint in writing, depending on what the writing says.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they'll just say, well, my boss is abusive, my boss isn't treating me well, and they don't want to come out and flat out say it's sexual harassment, because they're worried about whether or not that's going to then have repercussions on them. And so if I get a complaint that someone said my boss is abusive, my boss isn't treating me right, and then they get retaliated against for that, that's not going to be a good claim. The complaint must have some words. It doesn't have to say I've been sexually harassed, but there must be some words that would alert a listener or the person receiving the complaint that you're making a complaint about something that's unlawful.
You know, I was reading one of your cases, the Queens jury $15 million case with respect to the hospital bosses who allowed a doctor with a history of sexual harassment to abuse female staffers for 8 years. So you handle this kind of stuff. You see this kind of stuff. Are jurors sympathetic? They may not be so sympathetic in automobile accident cases, I can tell you that. But with sexual harassment cases, what do the jurors do here?
Well, again, it depends what kind of jury you get. There are certainly jurors out there who, you know, they think, oh, this has gone too far. You can't even say anything. I hear my friends say that, like, oh, well, you can't even say anything in the workplace. Well, that's not true. You're allowed to talk to your colleagues. You're allowed to talk about sexual stuff, even in the workplace. But it's got to be something that's a welcome discussion. Like if you're talking to your friend and it's someone you know, you could say whatever you want to say. Now, if somebody else overhears it and is offended, that could be a problem for you. So I recommend everyone be careful about how they talk in the workplace. But it's not a situation where anyone, you know, has to worry about everything. But yes.
Listen, before we let you go, we don't have much time. Where do we find you if somebody needs you?
Okay, thank you for asking. Yeah, my firm is Leeds Brown Law, and you could certainly look us up on the website. You could type my name into Google, Rick Ostrove, it pops right up also.
You can see how busy he is. His phone's ringing even when he's interviewing with us. It's a good thing. Listen, Rick, I want to thank you very much for coming on. You gave the viewers a really nice synopsis, and hopefully we'll have you back in a couple of months.
Thank you, David. Take care.
It's a pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict has a big show right after this. All right, welcome back to today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We have Leslie Tayne with us today to discuss a very important topic, the eviction moratorium. Leslie, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me today.
And we were talking a little off camera on this. This is as confusing as a bar exam question for me, with all the different possibilities in terms of tenants and possibly being evicted. Maybe you can sum up a little. New York, federal, what is going on presently with the eviction moratorium?
So the eviction moratorium has been extended by the CDC, which is somewhat unusual since the CDC normally doesn't get involved in these kind of matters, but they consider this a public health crisis. And the goal is to try to keep people in their homes longer. So with the Delta variant expanding, causing more havoc related to COVID, they want to be able to keep people in their homes longer so that it doesn't impact public spaces. So the CDC acted really quickly and they extended the moratorium on the evictions and the eviction process.
So here's what I have here. Eviction moratorium ended 7/31, July 31st. But Representative Cori Bush has a sleep out on the steps of the Capitol, and at least the federal government expanded it 60 days. So at least we know the federal government going through, sometime, I guess, towards October. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. That was part of the catalyst for the change, but it has been extended at least 60 days. So there are options also to get it extended further. So, and there's lots of nuances with the changes. So it's really important to understand who's impacted and what circumstances are impacted by these changes.
Right. Then we have New York, which is not federal. New York was supposed to end on August 31st. And then somehow we moved it a little bit to, I don't know, how far did we move it in New York? Have we moved it in New York?
So right now in New York, the eviction moratorium protects you from being evicted for non-payment, and it's set to expire right now, August 31st, 2021. But there are options to get it extended depending on certain circumstances. So if you're at risk, for sure, you want to make sure that you are one of those that can be protected by the changes. And remember, though, that it's important to understand what your rights are as a tenant under certain circumstances and the timing of all this. But for right now, August 31st is the set date for expiration.
So we have some time, not too much, but we have some time under New York and under federal. And obviously that could change. And there's one other thing I want to talk about with respect to these changes is that there's a 14-day issue here. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about that with respect to the 14-day, issue?
Sure. So as far as the 14-day rule goes, it's important to understand that even though there does seem like there's time, there really isn't a lot of time. So in order to be evicted, you have to receive a notice. So even though there's an extension to the eviction process, that doesn't mean that you can't get a notice from your landlord. A landlord must give you that notice. And to legally evict you, the landlord has to get a judgment against you. The 14 days gives you an opportunity to stay in your home during that period of time. The tenant can go back to court and file an order to show cause to ask that the eviction be stopped. But you do have 14 days from when the judgment takes place, when the marshal comes to the house. But again, keeping in mind that that's towards the end of the process. It's the beginning of the process that you want to be super proactive about knowing your rights and being able to apply for assistance.
Landlords getting ahead of this by filing in the housing courts throughout New York City, just so it's there when the time comes and the moratorium is lifted and they're the first ones in line, or are they waiting until they're permitted to be able to file for an eviction?
So you have to have a proper basis to file for eviction. So it can't just be they want to get you out. So yes, you can still, as a landlord, can still file as long as, again, there's a proper basis to do so. And that does preserve their rights. It does take some time. Normally, under normal circumstances, depending on what side you're on, it might be a slow or a quick process. It usually takes about 3 months, the whole process to begin with. But with that said, landlords are taking and being proactive about preserving their rights. So be aware, if you got a notice, don't ignore it because you think there's a moratorium on the eviction process.
And I just remember before COVID, on a good year, you had 6 to 9 months to get somebody out based on all the things that can go on.
Certainly in the city, for sure.
Yes, yes. All right. So let's talk about resources for tenants, landlords, because everybody just wants to, the tenants want to stay in their place and the landlords want to get paid. That's all this is about. No one's trying to cause a ruckus. So what's going on with the websites to make sure that the tenants can apply for assistance? Are there glitches? What's going on here?
So there's always challenges when it comes to new programs and new websites. They push them out really quickly and there are glitches in them. So we learned that with the attempt to everyone to get the vaccine early on, with the challenges in getting through on the website. So be prepared that it may be an arduous task, but there are hotlines. There's the 311 that you can dial in New York City. There's the HUD housing counselors that you could reach out to if you need assistance. There's legal aid and other organizations that are out there. You can go to the bar associations, New York City Bar Association, and ask for a referral. And the local law schools very often have what's called housing clinics. So there are a lot of ways that you can get help if you're having challenges on the website. But there is a form that has to be filled out and that you need to present to your landlord. So that could be downloaded and printed. Again, if you have challenges with that, my recommendation is to reach out to one of these organizations to help.
Leslie, how do the landlords, how are they getting paid? Is it from the government to the tenant to the landlord, or from the government directly to the landlord, or is it both? How are the landlords getting their money?
So there's a couple of ways landlords can get paid. One is a relationship with the tenant. So one thing that I've encouraged and other practitioners have encouraged is a conversation with tenants about the challenges that they're facing and working through that. Same thing for the tenants, an opportunity to discuss with the landlord what's happening, where the money's coming from. Some landlords and the tenants and landlords can apply to programs where they both could be paid by the federal government or the state, but those programs have been really slow on the rollout and not that many families and landlords have been paid pursuant to that.
And your law group, are you on one particular side, tenant, landlord, both? How is it working in terms of the kind of work you're doing?
Generally, my side is on the debtor tenant side, where we help individuals who are faced with financial challenges manage through that. So what we've seen over the last year has been an enormous fluctuation of those with financial challenges. Having the moratorium has been really helpful to meet day-to-day expenses for those that can't meet their rent or their mortgage obligations, but that's going to change. And many of my clients realize that that's going to change very quickly and are concerned that in a short period of time, by Christmas time, that they'll actually be faced with foreclosure proceedings or if they're renters, eviction proceedings.
So many of the viewers, are going to have this problem. Our viewers always want somebody like you on. So please tell us where we can reach you.
So you can find me all over the net. My law firm is the Tayne Law Group, and we have offices all over the area. We do see clients by Zoom these days. With that said, you can find me at TayneLaw.com. You can certainly reach out to us at 866-890-7337. And of course, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.
That's what I like. Leslie Tayne, really great information, doing good service for everybody. Hopefully you'll come back and let us know how this eviction moratorium is continuing.
Love to. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. All right. Today's verdict. So much more coming back right after this. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are extremely pleased to have joining us today Congresswoman Grace Meng. Congresswoman, how are you doing today?
I'm good, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely a pleasure. The work you do is incredible. And I want to really start off a little bit about the trouble that students are facing. Many of them who've had to study virtually and learn virtually. You were ahead of the game on this. You were ahead of the game in terms of what students need to do to really stay up to date. So maybe you can talk to the viewers a little bit about this digital divide and why it's so important to you that students are given the proper equipment to learn.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me on, and I hope all our viewers are safe and healthy, and really appreciate the space to talk about this important issue that I agree a lot of people didn't realize how serious it was across our country, but also right here in New York. This digital divide, or the homework gap, however you want to describe it, has been a real problem throughout parts of America on a normal day before the COVID pandemic hit us. I've actually had the opportunity to travel across the country over the last 4 years. I was involved with outreach for the National Democratic Party, and met and spoke with so many people from rural communities to urban communities that would tell me stories like, they couldn't access a news site if it was online, or their kids couldn't do homework. They would have to go to the library if and when it was open, or sit in the parking lot of a business place or a fast food restaurant, just so their kids could accomplish and finish their homework. And so this was 12 million kids on a good day, 12 million days, kids way before COVID hit. And so we started working on this issue. We wrote legislation to create a grant program so that a school or a library could easily reserve hotspots so that they could allow their students to sign on to the internet in a free and affordable way. And then COVID hit, right? And so then we have about 55 million students who are now home. Some have the means to have their devices and have access, but many still don't. And so we continue to push legislation to make this more of a reality.
My son, he's only 10 and actually just turned 11, but while he was 9 and 10, those two different grades, he was really using a laptop. The Wi-Fi would go on, go off. Sometimes just the laptop itself wasn't even working. And I do have the means to make sure it works. And he still fell behind a day or two when my wife and I had to kind of get him back up to speed. My clients in the Bronx, really, they don't have the means at all, to be honest with you. Do you hear the stories that they end up sitting in their cars outside the strip malls, outside those types of places? And it's just heartbreaking, really.
It's still happening. We hear stories about students maybe sitting in the stairwell trying to get, better access to a signal, or even, borrowing someone else's signal. We still hear a lot of stories. And, on a good day, there were 30% of New Yorkers who did not have affordable access to the internet. And you're right, many of our families, you talk about your son, my kids, we have the means. We were able to get them devices and access, but too many students fell behind. And now during COVID, it's not just an issue of the homework gap, it's also people using the internet for telehealth, or mental health resources, or to look for a job and to literally work and make a living. And so this has become even more important.
So what's the end game here? What are you looking for in terms of funds? Do you network with like an HP group? Like, where do you go to get everything together so that it's shipped to the kids? And by the way, you're going to have to make sure the parents know how to set it up so that the kids know how to use it. Not too many 8 or 9-year-olds can set up their own laptops and get connected to school. That's even assuming they wanted to. So I don't know what do you have in store? The next level, I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, nationwide, there's a larger infrastructure issue that will hopefully be addressed by legislation that will hopefully soon be passed into law in Congress and signed by President Biden. But for now, we have worked with Senator Markey's office, for example, in the American Rescue Plan. We were actually able to secure $7 billion. And this was to expand a program called the Emergency Connectivity Fund. It is a program through the FCC that would provide money for families, schools, libraries to get hotspots, access to devices. And that's something that has helped a lot of families, but it is temporary. So Senator Markey and I are still working on providing more money to the tune of $40 billion. That would obviously help a lot more people. So we've been able to get $7 billion. We have more to go. But we've been making progress, and a lot of the progress is because COVID finally woke up the American people to realize that this is a problem that we need to solve ASAP.
Does there seem to be support from both sides of the aisle? This would seem to be an issue. The infrastructure seems to be an issue that, I think both sides would come together on this. Does that seem like it's going to happen?
Yeah, this is one of the issues where it probably affects everyone, whether you're from an urban district or a rural community. Everyone can relate, especially after the pandemic, what it's like not to have access or affordable access. And so we realize that this is really a human right, like electricity, like clean water. It's not something that in the year 2021 should be a privilege for anyone.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a little bit about the coming school year that's coming up. I know your children, my son, getting back into the school. What are your thoughts? No one really knows with the variant. No one, I think we're all going to be they're going to be wearing masks. Do you think it's going to be a hybrid model? What's your opinion? Where do you think we're heading come September?
I think parents are really worried about the Delta variant, especially for those of us who have children under the age of 12 who have not been able to get vaccinated yet. We want our kids in schools, even if that means wearing masks. We want as many people to be vaccinated as possible, but we have to remember that there are parents and families who need to have a hybrid model. Right now in New York City, there is no remote option for the coming fall semester. And I still hope that our city can come to some agreement where even if most kids are in school, that if there are children that need to be home for whatever health reasons, that they're able to still access the classroom.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you very much, Congresswoman, for taking the time, some great insight. Hopefully you'll come back in a couple of months and we could see how the Success Act is doing.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. All right. We have so much more. Today's verdict coming back right after this. Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our three guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue that you would like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until this next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.